Morning, everybody. My name is Greg Woolf, founder and CEO of Coalesce.ai, and I'm going to speak to you a little bit today about AI, what it means, and specifically what it means in financial services, and hopefully debunk the myth a little bit, given that there's a fair amount of hype around AI, in case anybody noticed, right? So who's heard of AI? Show of hands, right? Who's a little bit afraid of AI? Doesn't really know what it means, not quite sure what the impact is going to be. I'll count myself as that. Who thinks AI has some potential to really change things for the better, for the benefit of humankind? Okay, great. So what we're doing at Coalesce is we're using AI to automate the tedious, laborious work in financial services firms. And a little bit of the background and the journey of how I got here. Whoops, there we go, great. So when I was a kid, I was a sci-fi junkie, read a lot of books and watched a lot of movies, I'll admit. And a couple of books stories I'd like to bring to your attention. The first is a book on the left that was actually written in the 1950s, before we landed on the moon, right? Anybody heard of Robert Heinlein, Isaac Asimov, that genre, right? Right? And then more recently, Ex Machina, there's tons of movies about AI these days. But both of them feature an artificial intelligent entity being that was a key character in the story. And interestingly enough, I recently went back through financing that we just did and went back to my academic transcript, and I noticed that when I studied my bachelor's degree, I did in computer science, math, and linguistics, which was kind of an unusual combination. And the reason for that is I always thought that language was an expression of intelligence, right? How am I communicating ideas to you today? How do you converse with people? Use words, right? Words convey concepts. And I thought if we could teach a computer to understand those concepts, then maybe we could get this kind of AI creature. Unfortunately, I was 20 years too early, right? So after that, I got a degree in business and finance, came to the USA from, anybody guess the accent? Good, very good. And landed up starting my career at PwC in Boston, and then, it's my career since then. But today you can do degrees, postgrad degrees in natural language processing, which is a type of AI that's used where computers are reading and understanding language. So where I really think this actually took hold was in 2017. So January 1, 2017, it was as if somebody threw a switch, and I call that the Alexa moment. So Siri's been around since 2010. Right? Believe it or not, 8 years, right? Watson's been around since 2011, self-driving cars since 2014. But it was when Amazon could put a device on your kitchen table, right? And you could start to ask it questions. Maybe you're doing homework with your kids and you could say, what's the GDP of Turkey? And it would give a response. That's when people stepped back and they said, that's interesting. Maybe, how do I get that at work? Right? So that's when it started to become more mainstream. And then obviously since the beginning of last year, it's been a tremendous ride. I think we've had 500 or 600% growth just in the last year. So there's obviously a lot of demand for that. AI is evolving to perform human level tasks. So a little bit of an explanation kind of in terms of how I understand AI. Who remembers Gary Kasparov, 1997, IBM Deep Blue beating Kasparov? Great. All right. So at the time, that was an expert system, and what IBM did was they took a computer and they coded it with a bunch of rules to understand how to play chess. Now, when a chessboard starts, right, completely set up without any moves, there's 20 million possible combinations and permutations of the moves that you could do during that game. And what they did was they programmed the system with a bunch of rules based on expert chess players, and then the computer's ability to look ahead thousands of moves enabled it to beat the world champion at the time, who's Gary Kasparov, right? And it won, and there was a big kind of change for the industry. Has anybody seen AlphaGo? Heard of AlphaGo, right? So AlphaGo, Go is an ancient Chinese war game, which is really a simple game. There's just black and white points, and the goal, it's kind of a war game where your goal is to kind of annex the territory of your opponent, right? The problem is the simplicity of the game makes it really hard to codify, because Go, the number of combinations and permutations in the movie, and I see somebody smiling there, they've seen the movie, they've seen the show on TV. But the number of combinations and permutations that you have in a Go game is more than the number of atoms in the universe, right? So clearly, we couldn't take a computer program and teach it all the rules, because there's just almost limitless, almost an infinite amount of rules. So the way AI works these days is AlphaGo was developed by DeepMind, which was acquired by Google for $500 million in 2017, I think. And what they did was Go I encourage you to watch the movie on Netflix. It's called AlphaGo. It's a really interesting, exciting documentary. But Go beat the world champion Lee Sedol. The way the Go system differed from the IBM system is that with the old paradigm, what you would do is you would give the system data, right? You would code a bunch of rules, and then the system would create an outcome, right? And why this whole AI, neural networks, deep learning, anybody heard these phrases, right? Why it's different is because what you can do in this paradigm is you give the computer a bunch of data, and you give it a bunch of outcomes, and you step back and you say, figure out the rules, right? And using that mechanism, the system is self-learning, and it can figure the stuff out by itself. Okay, so let's return to a more pragmatic approach to AI. What we're doing is we're focusing on using AI in financial services firms to automate the doing, right? I like to categorize AI in two different levels. There's automating the thinking and automating the doing. So automating the thinking is where a lot of the hopes and fears, frankly, around AI is, and that is the computers are going to be able to identify patterns of data, read insights into the data that we humans don't understand. And that's scary because the computers may be smarter than us. And it's also interesting because, like, wait a minute, these computers may be smarter than us, right? They may figure out stuff that we don't already know. And if you think in every job in financial services, and frankly in most business, anybody who's sitting in office, what percentage of jobs are actually done through some kind of data analytics on a day-to-day basis, whether it's just reading numbers out of a spreadsheet for sales figures, inventory, purchasing, investments, right? There's a lot of data in the world. So if computers can figure out things and see insights in that data better than we do, that would be awesome, right? Especially in financial services. In fact, I think McKinsey says that about 69% of the data collection and processing work in financial services today can be automated with this advanced technology. But I don't think we're there yet, right? We're not focusing on the predictive insights yet. I think it's a technology challenge, but I also think it's a societal, cultural challenge, right? I don't think people are ready to come in and go to the computer and say, okay, well, what should I do today? Oh, okay, those are the 5 decisions I should make today. Thanks for the information. We may get there, we may not. Instead, what we're focusing is automating the doing through machine learning, right? So people who come into work and they do repetitive, tedious, boring work all day long that they'd like to get rid of to focus on the interesting stuff, that's where we're getting a lot of traction, and that's what people are loving. And by the way, the piece that left for the humans to focus on is the piece that humans are much better at, the interpretation, the insights. So at this point, that's what we're focused on. So the impact for financial services, as I said, McKinsey is estimating about 65 to 69% of a lot of the repetitive work in financial services firms can be automated with this technology, ranging from customer service, sales and marketing, investment risk, monitoring, surveillance, especially around risk and surveillance. I'll give you a few examples in a minute, but the main thing I wanted to focus on is the user experience, because this conference is about the experience of the user. And in order to do that, we've actually taken a little bit of a different view on how we approach this. A lot of folks have created these very arcane AI solutions that are highly complex and require a PhD in machine learning and data science in order to enable it within the organization. And instead, what we've done is we focused on the user. We've created a product that allows a business user to teach the system to automate and learn to do the repetitive, laborious work that they do every day without any programming. So they literally, just like you go through Netflix and you say, I like this movie and I don't like this movie. So through our product, a business user has the experience of being able to say, this is a correct transaction, this is an incorrect transaction. And the system learns by copying their behavior, and over time it starts to automate out the repetitive work with a confidence score so that the user can say, I can start to trust the confidence of the system doing the laborious repetitive work, the mundane work, and the things that the computer's not that sure about, that's the interesting stuff that I actually want to take a look at. So it's augmented human decision making. We're helping the humans do a better job by focusing on the things that they're better at, just like plowshares to tractors. Okay, and we've been fortunate to win a number of awards, and I think there's a real potential in the space. So an analogy that I really like to use is finding the needle in the haystack. Okay, a lot of folks are focused on using AI or technology to find the needle in the haystack. The problem with that is if you want to teach a computer software, right? That's all AI is. It's a set of statistical algorithms that does a bunch of weights, right? Mathematical weighting, right? If you want to teach a computer to be able to differentiate, let's say to find a fraudulent transaction, right? The problem is you need to give it millions and millions and millions of examples, right? Because it needs to be clear to find that needle in the haystack. Examples of what is fraud and what is not fraud so that it can learn to differentiate, right? What we found when we launched our product and we started talking to our customers in financial services was that it was a lot easier to shift the paradigm and flip it and say, well, wait a minute. The pain point is not finding the needle. The pain point is all the false positives. The pain point is somebody sitting at their job saying, no, 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 running a query against, let's say, looking through emails and looking for the word guarantee. Okay, I'm seeing, or concern. I'm seeing a lot of emails about concern. Well, that's because somebody was concerned about their kid who had a concussion in the soccer game, right? That's different to I'm concerned about our accounting treatment that we're doing in this type of transaction, right? So what we found was actually by suppressing the false positives, we could, instead of trying to find the needle in the haystack, we reduce the size of the haystack, right? The part of the work that the humans don't want to do anyway, and we're left with the 10 to 20% that the humans are much better at. And the good news about that is it's a lot, and here's the secret, don't tell anybody, especially our competitors, it's a lot easier to teach a system to find the 90% of noise than it is to find a needle that looks like straw. So that's our magic. Okay, so I'll give you a few examples over here. We have a customer, they're a national bank. Their customer service team gets 50,000 emails a month. They're 300 customer service reps who literally have to filter through those emails and categorize them according to different requests. Very common requests. I can't, their customers are saying, I can't find my password, I can't get online, I lost my card. Kind of typical types of responses, right? So we were able to teach, in fact, they were able to teach our system to read those emails on their behalf and then classify them as to what the person is asking for and automatically maybe ask a service request to reset a password, right? Because we know who the email came from, or maybe queue up a template of a response saying, dear so-and-so, thank you for your inquiry, here is a response for you. So automating that tedious work so that their customer service reps can focus on the more value-added work. Auto loan processing, once again, this is a financial services firm. They do a lot of auto loans. It's a real tedious process, very expensive from an operations perspective for them to collect the purchase and sale document from the dealer, match the VIN number, go do some research against external databases like Kelly Blue Book, finding out the vehicle history, is there lemon, did this car have an accident, work it through the whole process, save some information, get some income information, real just tedious work that's burning people out. We're able to automate much of that process, 80% ability to read through a document, an unstructured document, right? So the documents look different every time, but the content that's inside of them is substantially the same. Being able to read through the document, take that information and automatically insert it into a database, all on autopilot. Nobody has to judge it. And then lastly, fraud and collection. So the ability to teach the system, like we said in that example earlier, to do gifts and entertainment monitoring, surveillance, those types of things that financial services firms that are obviously highly regulated are required to do anyway. Okay. So we're very active in the Boston community in the AI space. We actually run meetup groups with over 10,000 members. Anybody know about meetup groups? If you don't, I would seriously recommend you join. Go to meetup.com and find some groups. It's a free organization, and through that organization, we've definitely had a lot of interesting conversations and met some wonderful people, especially from a recruiting perspective. But about a year ago, we started exploring with some of our customers, this whole concept of what does AI mean? How can it be used for the industry? And essentially, what we found that there was, just like you folks, there was a concern, right, about what is it going to mean. And we pulled together an AI think tank here in Boston with some of the leading financial services firms in Boston. The people we have that participate in our think tank are global head of risk, senior vice president of operations, VP operations. So real senior business people who've been around the block, who understand what it means to bring new technology into a business, into an operation. And we're really interested in exploring how AI can be used, firstly, for their own purposes. But the real thing that was really interesting that came out of this conversation was that the spirit of collaboration. A lot of these folks said, especially when we're talking about the use of AI for non-competitive activities, so something that's not alpha generating. Who knows what alpha generating is, right? So basically, it's an investment company that alpha is their ability to make more money than the next company by making investments, obviously highly competitive. Or it's not customer acquisition, right? So we're not competing on the marketing. But things that they collaborate on, like, for instance, fraud and money laundering and terrorism and all those bad things, right? We found through our think tank that there was a real spirit for them to collaborate. So we actually kicked off a project using our AI in a new fashion, which is an AI collaboration. And I'm actually really excited about this because what we noticed was AI became a catalyst, right? And maybe it was the fear or the expectation of this technology, but it became a catalyst for these really senior people, these real big name firms to get together and say, you know, how could we use this technology together to bring something good to the industry? And it's not just about de-risking our own businesses, it's also about potentially de-risking the whole industry. And what really got exciting about this is we actually ended up being invited down to meet with a few congressional leaders, folks on the Senate Banking Committee and the House Financial Services Committee, because they too, government and regulators and agencies are also kind of wrestling with how do we use this technology, how can we use for the greater good, right? Especially when you consider the growth of data has grown so exponential, it's a real challenge for the government agencies as well. And we're actually in discussion with some of those folks in terms of how we can take this to a broader appeal. So it's an exciting time to be in A. We're very privileged and lucky to be here, and thank you for having me here today, and I'd love to answer any questions.
Great, thank you, Greg. First question up, how can AI be leveraged to be helpful and provide trusted advice and skills that humans are best at?
That's a great question. I think it's all about transparency and visibility, right? I mean, AI needs to move away from being this kind of fictitious robot, Skynet that's going to kind of come and do bad things to it's a tool that has the ability to do a lot of data processing. Remember, more kind of combinations and permutations in AlphaGo than the atoms in the universe. And I think the important part around that is being able to provide a confidence to the user. And one of the things that we do in our product is when the computer says, we think this is a suspicious email, right, we provide a confidence score so that the user can have some transparency and see what's going on there behind the scenes.
Great. Next question, what are the best methods to manage bias that manifests in AI?
Bias is a great question, and it's definitely a concern and something that's come up in our think tank when we're looking at kind of putting bumpers around how the AI works. Really, for us, it's not so much of a challenge because we're not trying to get predictive. We're not trying to have the computer make decisions on behalf of people. In fact, we're having the computer learn from people. That said, there are some technical capabilities and techniques to remove bias. So one would be refreshing the data set, right? Thinking of a computer as a learning machine, and over time kind of refreshing some or part of its learning capabilities with kind of generic data. So for instance, there's a concern around redlining districts in mortgage, in issuing loans. There are some technical challenges around that, and I definitely think that's a really insightful question and something the industry needs to figure out. Fortunately, it's not an area that we're not trying to tell people how to think. In fact, our customers are bringing bias to the table by saying, this is exactly how we want you, the computer, to learn how to process this type of transaction. So we're on the flip side of that. But I do think from an industry perspective, that is a real risk when we get more into the world of predictive stuff.
And we'll do one more question here. There's lots AI can do. How are you addressing what it should do?
That is a great question. I thought you were going to ask, what does it can't do, right? Haircuts. I want a computer robot buzzing near my ears. So what it should do, once again, it's about ethics and formulating that. And I wouldn't be surprised, we started off with Robert Heinlein from the 1950s. And if you look at job titles today, it's just insane in terms of the job titles that are around today that we never would even have kind of conceived 5 or 10 years ago. I wouldn't be surprised, having read a lot of sci-fi, that in 5 or 10 years' time, we'll start to see an interest in people studying philosophy and ethics, and that becoming a formal, regimented degree in terms of concrete implementation of what our human expectations of what software should do and how that can be applied to the world of computer science. But I'm speculating.
Thank you again, Greg.
Thank you.